a large party in the small town of Inwood, Manitoba. Everyone knows each other well. The guests are all talking about the brutal and bloody murder that took place months earlier. Alcohol flows, and people who should keep quiet reveal dark, dark secrets. No one is who they pretend to be. It's a party with a great big surprise that brings a mysterious death out of the woods and into the light. The rural hamlet of Inwood, Manitoba, Canada, named for the dense surrounding woods on Provincial Trunk Highway 17. Inwood is 50 miles northwest of Winnipeg, Manitoba's capital. The 1912 expansion of the Canadian Pacific Railway makes Inwood accessible to a range of settler groups. Residents are farmers, commuters, and retirees. But the population has always been small, and only about 200 people call Inwood home.
So it's a small, typical rural town. There's no more grocery store, no more pub, no more implement dealers. Peaceful and quiet. If you live in rural Manitoba, you're probably 90% sure of never having a crime occur to you. Minor crime, maybe a little willful damage or something once in a while. Steal a truck, steal a car, but overall, rural Manitoba is an extremely safe and peaceful place to live.
Ivan Radocaj, a former pro wrestler, is murdered in his home.
For a small town like Inwood, I'm sure that everyone there remembers both of these incidents and will talk about them on a regular basis, because in 1996 there was a murder of a resident of Inwood over a very minor matter, and then 10 years later another murder occurs in Inwood, again over a very minor financial matter. 2 murders within a 10-year period is extremely rare.
Ivan lives alone, and it's a couple of days before his body is discovered. When no one hears from him, a friend goes over to investigate and stumbles upon a gruesome scene. He then calls police.
Officers photographed a crime scene. Radocaj's body lies face up on the floor of his cluttered living room, close to the front door. The keys are still in the lock. He wears jeans with cigarettes in the pocket and light weather clothing. They find the house in disarray. In a bedroom, dresser drawers have been left open, and the mattress has been pushed or thrown off the bed.
When you arrive at a crime scene and you look around, you don't just look at the body, you look at the body initially and determine if it's dead or alive, obviously. but you start quickly examining for minor details or obvious things that are not normal at that scene. And to have the 2 bedposts off would be a flashpoint for any good investigator to think that there was something of value that these suspects were looking for.
They also observed that Ivan's front door has been forced open from the outside, but there's no pry marks that indicate tools were used. Still, this looks like a robbery gone wrong.
My name's Ivan Radocaj, son of John Radocaj. He was a wrestler, Big John, Croatian Giant, Ivan, Ivica was his actual name. So actually I was at home. I was on the phone with a friend from high school, and my auntie, his sister, was at our house. I remember I could hear kind of freaking out in the next room, and then my mom kind of rushed into my room and said, we have to go to your grandparents' house. So we went there, found out it was true, and then shortly after that, the RCMP came, and they had kind of told us that it was confirmed he was passed.
For a police officer, you never get used to the walking up those steps to the door, the knock on the door, confronting the family with the fact that you found their loved one deceased. There is nothing worse than the family receiving that news, and it's a horrible feeling for everyone, but you have to do it over and over as a police officer. It's horrible, and no police officer likes that duty, but it's one that has to be done in person.
The police interview everyone, from Radocaj's friends and parents to the waitress who serves him mere hours before his death.
And when a family has a hunch, it's worth following, even though it may be just a personal dislike of someone, or it could be an internal family conflict. When they mention that they have a suspicion or have a hunch, you have to follow it up.
I didn't really know Melanie at all. I didn't really know that side very well, but there was always suspicion in my family from my grandparents and, even his sisters.
You always take what a family says seriously because they know internal feelings, jealousy, life insurance policies, and you have to check it out.
Ivan's widow, Melody Sanford, appears to have a normal reaction to his death. She's clearly grieving. Ivan and Melody had been having trouble, but they were working things out. They'd just seen each other before he was attacked. At the time of Ivan's death, she was staying with her best friend, Rita Kushney.
A cooperative Sanford is interviewed as a witness, not a suspect. Police need to establish context for the murder of her husband.
As you're interviewing, obviously, in a small town, unless it's a transient person passing through, your primary suspects are going to be known to someone in the area. They're either going to be connected to the family, connected to the community, or live within a fairly small radius of the deceased.
Waves of fear and suspicion crash through this tiny town. Why Ivan? And could anyone be next?
That's where most people know everybody, know who, recognize people in that area. They immediately go into a panic or a stress mode upon a crime. Everybody goes to ground, so to speak. They talk about it, it's coffee talk. They're concerned if someone's a killer in the area, they might not go out as often. In an unsolved murder, when time has passed, and that's varying degrees of time, usually a year at least, maybe more. Now you're waiting for normalcy to come back to a small community, and these people will come out slowly and get back to normal. Parties go back to normal, people go back to socials, they start going to church, they live a normal life, which is one of the reasons why you see police cars at funerals and police cars at memorial services and any family gatherings. Sometimes the suspects are at those events. And you look for tire tracks, you look for stuff, you look for everything you can at the beginning when you don't have a suspect.
Everyone is still talking about the murder. Rita Cushney, her son Donald Richard, Christopher Houle, Danielle Richard, Tim Richard, and many others attend a party shortly after Radocaj's murder.
It's a typical party. People are laughing, having some drinks, kicking back, but then the conversation turns dark. When the discussion starts to be about the details of Ivan Radocaj's death, the music is turned off.
So as time passes, Corporal Sells of RCMP Major Crime Unit gets a call from another RCMP officer at Lundar Detachment, and he has encountered a witness that has heard some things which has disturbed them, and they want to pass it on to the police. If you're in a party or a gathering or even a one-on-one and someone starts talking about having committed murder, you definitely pay attention and hang on every word that's said. And you're either going to wish you hadn't heard it or you're going to want to pass that information on.
She tells police that a friend has told her these details of the murder, intimate details, more than once, and seemed to not think that she'd have any problem with hearing this.
The anonymous individual agrees to cooperate with police. Over a few months, she provides ongoing witness statements that are pivotal to the investigation. And one night, when she's invited to a party, she agrees to wear a wire.
It's been my experience that if there's more than two, it is not a secret and you cannot trust.
A former pro wrestler is murdered in a rural Canadian town. The police have no leads, and it looks like the crime is going to go unsolved. But when a local woman hears people freely discussing details of the murder, she contacts police and agrees to wear a wire.
When you know that there's someone in the area that possibly knows about this or is involved in the case, you have many technical means to use. The common term is wearing a wire, where you insert a secret recording device on a person who's cooperating. They're either an agent for you or a willing witness. It may take some time, but they'll eventually try to get them to talk, or they'll produce statements to aggravate them to speak.
Some of the partygoers are listening to this conversation, which includes details of Ivan's murder, with revulsion. And they're not the only ones. The police are listening too, live through the help of a wire. They're being led to the killers by the killers.
Yeah, later it turned out that all the suspicions were true.
Often in an environment where these criminals have committed an offense, they're very tight-lipped for some time. But time erodes their willingness to be quiet. They have to brag about it, they have to tell somebody, and they usually want to do that in a setting or with people that they're familiar with or comfortable with and that they think they can trust.
She takes a big risk in her community, but she wants to help bring about justice for Ivan.
The memories that I guess the most vivid was just days that we would go to the beach and, you know, there's the big waves. We'd wait for a windy day, big waves, and I'd be swimming around there with him, treading water, and, you know, if you ever get in trouble, you'd get pulled out from your shorts or from the back of my shirt, and, you know, all of a sudden I'm 7 feet in the air because he was so big. I guess at his peak, he's about 6'11". If you see somebody that size, usually you remember them, right? And, you know, a giant teddy bear. It's just a kind of stereotypical thing.
Ivan John Radocaj is born in the 1960s. He's big as a child and known to be a hearty eater. He grows up to be gigantic.
He played football too at one point for St. Vital Mustangs. When he went to go get sized for equipment and stuff, they didn't even have a helmet that would fit him. They had to actually contact the Bombers and get a helmet from them and spray paint it red so he had a helmet to wear when he played back in those days.
The 1980s was a boom time for wrestling. With cable television, pay-per-view, and promoters, his parents see the possibilities. And in 1981, they take him to new brand wrestling promoter Walter Shevchik and ask him to train their son as a wrestler. Shevchik takes on the teenage Radocaj and puts him in the ring at events that are taped at the Chalmers Community Center for broadcast on a local cable access channel.
I mean, once he got into wrestling, he obviously enjoyed it, and I think they just encouraged him to keep with it as long as he could.
Radocaj appears at numerous Central Canadian pro wrestling events. But when the new brand wrestling folds in 1984, he rarely enters a ring.
Shortly after wrestling, he became a sumo wrestler. And yeah, just the size of him, right, was pretty memorable.
In 1985, he becomes the first champion of Shevchik's North American sumo wrestling, a less violent contact sport.
Ivan does well because he's so large he can't be pushed out of the ring. However, after his short career ends, he gains quite a bit of weight and no one really hears about him anymore.
And he was at one time over 600 pounds. I was very young when this happened, but he had some sort of gastric bypass surgery just because of the weight. Yeah, he had a few complications from that where he dropped a lot of weight faster than he was supposed to, and he was pretty sick, but then I think he started to overcome that.
He retires to Inwood, Manitoba, where he leads a quiet life. Neighbors say that Ivan moves into his Inwood home in the spring of 2007 and mostly keeps to himself.
Radocaj has known Melody Lynn Sanford for years. Melody has 3 children from another relationship, although she is at times estranged from them. July 24th, 2007. Melody files a petition for a protection order against Radocaj, which is granted by the courts. It bans him from coming within 500 meters of her.
About a month after they got married was when they first started having the issues, and they actually, I guess, separated. And then she used kind of, getting back together to set up the murder.
The ex-wife saying about his violent streaks, outbursts, having to get a restraining order, you want to be able to go and see if that just isn't domestic conflict, or is there something to his personality that maybe you don't know about that would have led to other aspects of violence or assaults occurring to him by someone he may have offended. So you interview brothers, sisters, parents, even people in the community. What was he like? What was his demeanor? And you can go back on that profile to his childhood, because he's from a small town. So you go and trace what he's like, and quite often you'll come up with a completely different version of what his personality is like, especially from family, because they're going to say positive anyway. But when you get friends saying, oh no, he's not violent, he's the nicest guy in the world, never heard him say a bad thing about anybody, there's always conflicting stories. One will try to get a story out against the other. Now you look at the possibility that this restraining order was cooked up.
Almost as soon as Melody moves in with Ivan, she leaves to live with her friend Rita Kushney. But Ivan and Melody have a lot of history. They're old friends, and they find a way to work through all these grievances and differences.
So Radocaj meets with his ex-wife on the night of the murder in a small restaurant in Toulon, Manitoba, the night of the murder. And they are discussing things, obviously trying to come to some reconciliation, or who knows what the exact conversation was, but they're having a get-together in the restaurant to try to patch things up.
They leave the restaurant and spend time talking in the parking lot. They're seen by the restaurant staff as they hug and kiss. Ivan and Melody leave the restaurant as they arrive, in separate cars. As they each drive back to their respective places, Ivan believes that now there is hope.
So Radocaj is not aware that once he leaves this meeting with his ex-wife and returns to his residence, it will be the last thing he ever does.
The autopsy report reveals he dies from blunt force trauma and has 8 head injuries. The major wounds are a 14 by 9 centimeter abrasion to the right side of Radocaj's face, a penetrating injury to his right forehead, another large injury on the top of his head, and a shattered brain base.
The deceased is killed with a crowbar, in common terms, and baseball bat. If you're going to commit grievous bodily harm to someone, you would come armed with crowbars and a baseball bat.
He has defensive wounds on his left arm and wrist as he attempts to shield himself from blows in what appears to be a random robbery. When a former pro wrestler is murdered, the case looks like it's going to remain unsolved. But when an informant wears a wiretap, police get a good idea of what really happened to John Radocaj. But the alleged ringleader of the plot tells police that she and her daughter are actually the victims.
Now the ex-wife comes forward with another piece of information that she had actually hired some people to give her ex-husband a bit of a beating because he had allegedly sexually assaulted her daughter, and she wanted to teach him a lesson. And now she is either trying to help the police with it, or she's trying to distance herself from being involved. So now they have more information to go on. Since he's deceased, he can't defend himself. So once you do your investigation through court records, access, family interviews, you find out possibly he was the one being harassed by her. She just took an aggressive position to go after him first.
Well, yeah, there was things that were said, I guess, to these people that he was, I guess, a sexual deviant. He was he sexually assaulted her daughter and stuff, which was obviously not true.
But Melody drops a bomb. She tells police that she was victimized by Ivan. Ivan denies all of Melody's claims of abuse. In fact, he even takes out his own order of protection against her. Ivan files documents in August 2007, claiming that Melody tricked him into a fraudulent marriage just because she wanted to steal his money. Ivan's father said that his son feared for his life.
And he was actually in an accident, I think just a couple years before the murder, where he actually rolled a car on the highway. He hurt his neck pretty bad.
The documents say that Melody only became interested in him when she found out that he'd received a settlement from Manitoba Public Insurance for $49,000.
The wiretap recording breaks the silence and the case wide open.
A brave citizen wearing a wiretap collects evidence that leads police to seek out several individuals.
When you're interviewing people, and if they've had a premeditated approach to this case, they're going to have their stories kind of lined up. So they're going to deny until you can put something in front of them or get someone to talk in front of someone else that's going to come and be a witness. Once they realize that the evidence is there and they're going to do time for something, they will try to soften their case by turning on others, and it's a domino effect.
They bring in Donald Richard, Daniel Richard, and Christopher Houle for questioning. The police learn that Donald Richard recruits his cousin Tim, who was only 18 years old, and lives with Donald and his family.
Tim Richard tells police that he's at several meetings where a conspiracy to commit murder is discussed.
Much like rats abandoning a sinking ship, when things go bad for humans, they tend to turn on each other. Obviously, the information they gain from the wiretap leads them to Tim Richard, who starts to want to cooperate. He knows that the gig is up, and he starts to reveal information to the RCMP that it is actually the ex-wife who was the mastermind behind this. People turn on each other, and criminals tend to turn quicker than most.
Police question Melody and Rita. The women claim they have nothing to do with the murder.
Most crimes in rural Manitoba are crimes that are spontaneous. They're crimes of passion, fueled by alcohol or drugs in some cases. Very seldom do you see pre-meetings with the suspects who are going to commit the crime. That's a very rare occurrence anywhere, let alone in rural Manitoba. Once the police found that out, you would be building towards a very strong murder case.
We weren't extremely close. We had a bit of a falling out quite a few years before he had passed away. A lot of it, I blame myself for it. Immaturity of a young child at the time, and there was times where we both tried and it never worked out and just never really got back on pace. And obviously now I never get the chance. That was kind of taken away from me. Obviously I had, my private breakdowns and stuff like that, but tried to hold it together as best as I could.
Donald Richard, Daniel Richard, Tim Richard, and Christopher Houle drive to Radocaj's isolated house in a van belonging to Donald's spouse. Tim Richard is with them in the van driving. When the group arrives at Radocaj's house, Daniel tells his cousin Tim to stay with the van. The others get out. They take a baseball bat and a couple of crowbars with them, setting the scene for what will become a gruesome and unrelenting attack on the former pro wrestler.
When Ivan enters the front door, he's attacked. Despite his size, he's no match for an ambush. He's in an isolated area where no one can hear him scream.
All this for a meager cash payout that was promised to them by the victim's soon-to-be widow, Melody Sanford. The men rob the home. Although they find neither the money nor the stash of illegal cigarettes that they were led to believe was awaiting them, they remove various electronics and other items of property. When they've taken everything of value, the three flee about 15 minutes later, leaving Radocaj to die.
After they commit the murder, they steal some relatively inexpensive items from the home, a TV, a computer. They took these items and some other things. They proceed through the wooded area near the home, wipe the blood off the weapons, and discard the weapons in the bush.
The men grab a 15-pack of beer and go to meet Melody and Rita to celebrate.
If we can believe Tim Richard, Melody isn't quite the grieving widow she wants people to believe.
Ivan John Radocaj, a gentle giant of a man, is led to believe he's reconciling with his wife. He goes home full of hope, only to be killed by a brutal ambush. But Radocaj's killers have not covered their tracks.
The police, especially the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, have many capabilities. And they start to peel away the onion skins of the lies and the details about the drawing of the house, how to get in the house, all of this stuff. These guys who are, in my opinion, duped in by her to killing him for a despicable amount of property. And time will tell if there is a conspiracy to commit.
Melody Sanford is first accused of conspiracy to commit murder, and then the charges changed to also include first-degree murder. 4 others faced the same charges. Rita Cushney, Cushney's son, Donald Richard, family member, Daniel Richard, and friend, Christopher Houle. The murder trial for the death of a former professional wrestler, Ivan John Radocaj, begins at the law courts in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
I was there for the trial. I was there for pretty much all of it. It's tough. It's kind of the first time you're hearing a lot of things. You're in the same room as these people, right? They got to walk right past you, and you got to spend hours of your day basically looking at the people that murdered your father. It's tough.
One of the key Crown witnesses is Tim Richard, who agrees to testify in exchange for immunity to avoid prosecution.
Tim Richard tells jurors he attends several meetings where the others discuss plans to kill Radocaj. Melody claims that Radocaj molests her daughter and then offers $10,000 in life insurance money for the young men to carry out the act. She shows them pictures and maps of Radocaj's property during meetings at Rita Cushnie's home.
She kind of told them all these things where there was all this money and there was all these things they could get from the house if, you know, they did this for her. But it was just driven by her greed.
Melody's role is to get Ivan out of the house and out for dinner while her friends come back to his place and lie in wait for him.
Then she used kind of, getting back together to set up the murder.
Donald Richard, Tim Richard, and Daniel Richard make several trips to Radocaj's house to scout things out. Melody provides photos of Radocaj's house and yard and discusses vantage points, access, and more. According to Tim, Rita Cushnie coaxes Donald to help Melody. Tim describes a series of phone calls on the night of the murder. The calls are between the men in the home, Rita Cushnie, and Melody Sanford, who has just left her date with Radocaj. Together, they line up Ivan's execution. Jurors watch videotape police interviews with Sanford and Donald Richard, plus evidence seized from Sanford's home, which includes a notebook containing a diagram of Radocaj's home. Melody's fingerprints are found on the notebook. Detailed phone records between the accused are entered as evidence. The men also try to profit from the crime, trying to sell the items they steal from Radocaj.
Rita Cushnie testifies in her own defense at trial and claims she knows nothing about the plot to murder Ivan. But she says that Melody had shown them all her bruises, accusing Ivan of attacking her and her daughter. Melody claims that Ivan sexually assaulted her daughter, and not only that, he'd been threatening and stalking her. Melody admits that she wanted Ivan beat up for assaulting her daughter, but she didn't want him killed. Melody's daughter, however, does not back her up. She tells the court that Ivan never laid a hand on her.
So during the trial, when Melody's daughter reveals that she was not sexually assaulted by the deceased, all of a sudden the other parts have plateaued and fade away, and the court will realize that this was a first-degree murder. Whether he's convicted or not, it is a first-degree murder in my mind.
And luckily she came forward and said, like, hey, none of this is true, this never happened. It's tough to hear that stuff about your dad, right? Like, when they come out saying stuff like that, and then it's always good to find out it wasn't true by the, by the person that it, I guess, was accused of happening to.
Rita breaks down and rages at her son, Donald. She says that she was asleep the night of the murder and that Donald had become romantically involved with Melody. Rita says she would have called the police had she known about this plot, and she denies having anything to do with coaxing Donald to murder.
Melody Sanford counters, saying that Rita Cushney tells her son that she's proud of him after the killing.
I guess 5 of them were convicted. 2 of them got second degree murder, and the other 3 got first degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder.
The jury fined Melody Sanford, Rita Cushney, and Donald Richard guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Each are given a life sentence with no chance of parole for 25 years. Daniel and Christopher pled guilty and are convicted of second-degree murder with no chance of parole for 10 years. The charges against Tim Richard are waived in exchange for his testimony as a Crown witness against the 5 co-accused. The investigation entails more than 80 investigators that are working with witness interviews, wiretaps, and physical evidence. Rita Cushney overturns her verdict, and a new trial is ordered in 2015.
After her 2 appeals fail, Melody finally admits her role in the murder-for-hire slaying of her husband, but she brings Rita down with her. She claims that her and Rita were in this together all along.
It's a tragedy, really, a horrible tragedy in a small town to have someone this malicious and vicious do something to another human being. There's no such thing as a perfect murder, but there can be some pretty close stories.